So here we are, 60 days. 60 days away from, if things continue apace, the real, literal, not symbolic, the end of democracy. And you know what we're going to do between now and the end of democracy? What people on the left side of the political spectrum are going to do, from the center left to the intermediate left to the moderate left to the far left. You know what we're going to do? We're going to sit back on our asses or stand up on our feet with our fists raised, and we're going to argue with each other about who is the more pure social democrat. Who is the more pure Democrat? What group among us is being left out because this faction of Democrats argues with this faction of Democrats that says the third faction of Democrats are full of shit? We're going to do this, aren't we? I've seen this happen so many times. And who steps into the breach? In this case, the monster that ends democracy in this country. Fascism, personified by the orange ape. Why are we going to do that? I mean, we're doing it now. Why are we going to do that? Why are we going to have these ridiculous debates back and forth about who's the more pure Democrat, while in the meantime, the monsters, the killers, the rapists, the fascists are sitting back just laughing their asses off, knowing what's going to happen on November 3rd. And this brings me back to what I talked about last week and yesterday. This failure, absolute, unmitigated failure on the part of so-called corporate media or mainstream media, whatever you want to call it, to identify these son of a bitches for what they are. And that may be because all corporate media in this country, by definition, is corporate. It's owned in a capitalist structure. News gathering, news dissemination, it's all fueled and funded by capitalism. So how, hold on a second while I take a breath. I feel just a whole avalanche of F words building up behind my palate, and I just want to come rushing out. So let me just, one moment, here we go. Okay. Corporate media is corporate media. That's why so many newspapers and writers and journalists and editors and publishers have disappeared in the past 15 years. First of all, this hideous fascistic tool called the internet. I mean, there's never been a tool designed more perfectly to promote, encourage, and sustain fascism than social media. I said the internet. What I mean is social media. Of course, we all need the internet. Absolutely. I agree completely. But social media, a construct that when you examine its inner workings and what it's capable of doing, it's a construct that could only have been created by a fascistic mind, or 2, or 6, or 10. Whether they realized they were creating a fascist implement that could destroy democracy is beside the point. They still created it for whatever reason. And here it is. You disagree? Tell me you disagree. Take a look at how Trump notifies his 80 million followers instantly, no matter what passes through his degenerate brain, no matter what kind of bullshit somebody has put in his ear 10 minutes later, it's out to 80 million people at the speed of light. Boom. How do you fight that? You can't. Unless every single believer in a democratic system of self-governance labels that for what it is: fascism, destruction. And fascism ultimately leads to death camps, whether they're called death camps or not. North Korea, China, Russia, call them gulags, re-education camps. I don't give a shit if you call them a cheese sandwich. That's where fascist governments send people to be killed, either immediately or over a period of time. But they are there to be eliminated. Look at the Pol Pot government. Look what happened in Cambodia. I mean, the country was almost denuded of human beings because of the mad fascism of that degenerate leader. How far do you think Trump is? Or let's put him aside for a second. How far do you think fascism is in this country from the honest-to-God so-called re-education camps or concentration camps or death camps? How is that another thing that if I mention it or somebody else mentions it, people roll their eyes and go, "Oh, Malloy, for Christ's sake. Oh, come on, Mike. Come on, Jesus." But if you take a look at what is slowly developing, now we're to the point of people being gunned down in the streets by different factions. In addition to being gunned down in the streets by so-called law enforcement. Man. I don't know sometimes what to say anymore. I've said this before. I mean, so much of what I say on this podcast sounds to me, when I listen to the podcast, and I listened last night and I heard at the very end, for some reason, the closing music didn't play. At the very end, I could hear myself going, big cough. I apologize for that. But when I listen to myself sometimes on these podcasts, I tune in at 9 o'clock Eastern also on my little Progressive Voices app on my cell phone. And I'll listen, and sometimes I can listen to the whole thing. A few weeks ago, when I was still screaming and frothing at the mouth and using the F word, I just couldn't listen. After a while, I just like, oh my God, stop. So for everybody who stuck with me through that time, thank you very much. But when I listen to myself from that day's recording, and I think, what are you talking about? Well, this is hard to put into words because I want to sit here for my hour on Progressive Voices and just issue warning after warning after warning about how we're going. I am old enough to have seen so many waves of different sorts of political chicanery just roll over this country. And each time, somehow we would come back, but not as completely as where we were when we started, in the sense of democratic self-rule. In other words, we start, this is just an example, we start from a position of pure democracy, democratic republic, but pure democracy. We elect people, we let those people know what kind of laws we want, we live by the law, we prosper, we treat each other fairly, we have an economic system that is based on profit and loss, based on survivability of a product or a service, but it's not predatory. It's not plantation capitalism. So everything goes along. And then something rolls across the country. In the 50s, it was McCarthyism. And we come back from McCarthyism, but not quite back into the democratic idea as where we were before McCarthyism. Does that make sense? Of course it does. And then we have the next wave. We have the next wave of modern American imperialism. The idea that we're going to stop communism wherever it is. And if it means killing hundreds of thousands, millions of people, we don't give a shit. We're going to do it anyway. And somehow we come back from that. And we build up our monuments to the American dead. But we don't come back as far as we were when we started, for the second time, and then the third time, and then the fourth time, and then all of a sudden it's gone. But it's not all of a sudden. It was incremental steps along the way. Listening to these demagogues, not hearing any resistance from the only source of resistance we have, media, communication, telling each other, these are fascists, they have got to be stopped. If they are not stopped, then we give up the whole idea of self-governance through a democratic system. Are you ready to give it up? Are you? Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcasts. You have your choice. You can listen to the ranting with the audio podcast or listen and watch me lose control with a video podcast subscription. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com. And never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.